Think about when would work best.
Yeah, that would be
I know
fun.
y'all
Maybe we could
schedule over
share
the
that.
next couple weeks are crazy, but
Yeah.
like I said, we need to do something. So.
I like that. I like that.
Yeah. Well, I'll text you a bit and we can figure out what might make sense.
How you doing? All right, you? We'll get there. All right, we'll see you.
There's no need to have that second.
Oh, well.
Okay, we ready? Okay. We've got a special treat today, and as a big favor to me, my father-in-law, Neil Anderson, who served as editor and publisher and actually owner of the Gospel Advocate from 1990 until just a few years ago. We can't remember exactly which year, but anyway, and I have been so excited about him coming to do this class. He is sort of fighting some back pain, so he's going to do it sitting down. And I had hoped that it would work out that he felt well enough to do it. And I was so excited that I forgot to tell him that it was this week. And I woke up, I think Monday night, and remembered that I hadn't told him what week I wanted him to come. So fortunately, he was able to put together some things. He's going to talk about the influence of the editors, and primarily, I guess this is going to be following the Civil War, but maybe even some before. So I don't want to take up any more time since we're going to be probably short on time anyway. So take it away.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. I have liked the church here for years. My mom and dad worshiped with you back in fact, my dad was the 8th person to move to the Meadows. So we've been, and Ted Underwood and the Gospel Advocate got room back over here. So it's nice to be with you. And we'll adapt some things I hope that will help you understand and appreciate. I haven't get feedback. It may be because of my ears and so forth. But anyway, Nelson did call and he said, I've been talking with Clayton and others. What is the difference between the Reformation and the Restoration? And I believe you've studied some on that. The Restoration or the Reformation. And so part of that leads to the idea of the movement that when Christianity came from Europe to the United States, it did because the people had come because they were led by men who called themselves bishops. They ran the show. And when they came over here, it turned out that the men who were leading the churches were known as editors. And most of that came about when the Civil War came about in the United States. The North and the South did not get along. And so during that period of time, these years, men like Talbert Fanning and David Lipscomb here in Nashville were able to get together and help spread the gospel, particularly in this region. I find living in Nashville very exciting as far as the church. When I was, I guess I was 19, 20 years old, I left St. Louis, Missouri on a bus and came to Nashville, Tennessee. And yeah, here it is. And the first book that I read when I got to Lipscomb was a book called The Fool of God. And it was a novel written by a man named Cochran, who worshiped at the Christian church over on Hillsborough Road. And it was about Alexander Campbell coming to the new land, meeting his father, and the two families getting together and coming to some conclusions that had not been followed over in the old land. What they tried to do was find a way to find a commonality, and they were going to try to reach a conclusion of what was right in the church. And so as I talk to you, let me tell you that the Gospel Advocate, which I mentioned on more than one occasion, is not the Bible. But the men who formed the Gospel Advocate were great believers in the Bible. Now, Talbert Fanning was one of my very favorite church leaders. He grew up in Cannon County, and he could get to his house only by horseback and walking. He was 7 years old when his family settled in that area, and he was very interested in farming. In fact, he became a very well-known farmer worldwide, also for his husbandry. And so the family stayed there for a few years and then moved to Alabama. And when he was 17 years old, reached out to a group of people that were preaching on street corners and tried to find out more about the gospel. He was a very wise man, came back to Nashville as a young adult, went to the University of Nashville, which was downtown 2nd Avenue, somewhere along in that area. And he became a well-known preacher and teacher. The thing that was kind of interesting is that as he reached out, people would flock to him, and his residence in Nashville was the current airport. All of the land was his farm and beyond what we now have as our Nashville airport. He was a wealthy man coming from poverty. And because he had done so well, people wanted to know more about what his beliefs were. And the exciting thing was that he couldn't preach to enough people in the area. And he would be called to this area and that area and other churches to preach for them. He couldn't reach out far enough. He didn't have enough time. So he started a publication called The Gospel Advocate. That was 1844. Now, I'll talk about that in a second, because he could not reach out to them. He wrote the Advocate and sent it to the people. So the people now had something to study with alongside their Bible. Very interesting concept. He, in 1855, because he was in the midst of all of this turmoil, and all, he started the magazine, and it spread very quickly. It was hard to keep it going because of finance, but he was able to put it together and was the first of 17 different men in the area that became editors or leaders of the magazine. Most of them were very popular, well-known preachers, not all of them, but between the years of 1855 and 1950, there were more than 300 journals like the Gospel Advocate published in the United States. more than 300 gospel advocates in that period of time. People were wanting to know about the gospel and did not have the resources or the facilities to have people to study with. So I found that in doing that, I asked Glenda again this morning, when was the period that the Churches of Christ grew so rapidly? Well, I think it was the 1950s and 60s. And when I think of that, I think of B.C. Goodpasture. And of the 17 editors that the Advocate had in that period of time, I think he had more influence on the Church of Christ in the United States. He was a very interesting man. And when I came to Nashville, a man by the name of Vernon Smith, Harrison 74412 was his phone number, and that was 1956 that I came. He took me over to Brother Goodpasture's house, and right off of the campus of Lipscomb. In his garage were books that looked like this. What's the name of the place over here for books for sale?
Books a Million?
Books a Million, yeah. He had that many kind of books in his garage. He was a great lover of books. And so he took what he could for those, gave them away, got more, but encouraged people to read and to understand the Word. I'm going to now kind of jump around because of time and because there are different kinds of situations on editors. My mother and dad were baptized in 1935 in St. Louis, Missouri. Incidentally, Lee Pettit and my dad were friends at church, 1935. They were young couples at that time. And my mother and dad did not even know of the church until someone said at Sears and Roebuck, they had a new device there, took people from the first floor to the second floor. And my dad went over there to see that, and he said, the man asked us to come and go to church with him. So my mom and dad went to the Southside Church in St. Louis, and they were able to study, but pretty soon my dad was transferred to Hudsonville, Illinois, for a 2-year contract to bring about a power plant on the Wabash River. My dad checked to see if there was a church in Hudsonville, and they said, yes, there's a church over here. He said, I have a contract to build a power plant, and we'll be here for 2 years. Shortly after they began that contract, they found out the church where they were worshiping was not like what they were familiar with in St. Louis. This church where they were worshiping in Hudsonville had one cup, 2 containers, but 1 cup. They had non-Sunday school beliefs. They were premillennial in their beliefs. They did believe that Christ would come back to the earth for 1,000 years reign. They believed in non-institutional churches and on and on. It was very disturbing to my dad, a young Christian, that the people that he had been taught the way of the Lord didn't believe like my dad was taught. My mother didn't like it, and I've kind of gone back and forth whether to use an illustration, but I'm going to do it because this was part of our life. when the Lord's Supper was passed around, my mother would first look to see where Brother Jones was sitting, and she sat on the other side. Brother Jones had a handlebar mustache, a very large mustache. And because they were a one-cupper, although they did have two containers, my mother chose to sit on the other side because she could not stomach taking the Lord's Supper after Brother Jones. Now, you understand that kind of thing? So my dad gave up a very good job because he didn't believe some of these practices. There was a belief in that area of Kentucky, Illinois, that by a man by the name of Summers. He had been taught in the Methodist Church and became, though, converted to the Church of Christ. It was awkward for him because was he a Methodist or was he a member of the Church of Christ? And he didn't quite know either. Eventually, he becomes disassociated with the Methodist Church and becomes a member of the Church of Christ and preaches. He is now called a Summerite. And there was another group of people called Catchersides. And they all had their own individual beliefs within the Church of Christ. And it was kind of awkward for them. I will tell you, as a young man, I remember having our bookstore in St. Louis when Carl Catcherside came in and talked to me a little bit, and he looked at me finally before his wife got him out of the building and said, "You are just too conservative. I can't have anything to do with you." And there was that kind of animosity among Christians, and it was very difficult to deal with. When I came to Lipscomb, I came on a bus through 5 states to downtown Nashville, rode a taxi cab out Granny White to the school. I didn't really know where I was, what I was going to do. I thought I was going to be a funeral director and get a degree in accounting, but Willard Collins had a different concept for my life. When I was a senior, he called me over to his office and he said, "Neil, I want you to be a preacher. Neil, I want you to be a preacher." No one said no to Brother Collins if you went to Lipscomb or knew of him. He was a great, gracious man. He said, "I have made arrangements for you to go to Lewisburg, Tennessee, and I want you to try out there to be a preacher." I went down that Wednesday night. I talked to the elders. On the way back home, I wondered what I would call and talk to Galinda, my bride-to-be. We had decided we would be a funeral director until that night when they said, "We'd like for you to come and be our associate minister beginning the Sunday after you graduate from school." So I called Glenda from a pay booth and told her our plans had changed from funeral homes to preaching. That was what we've done for the rest of our life. We've been Christian publishing for 50 years. Greatest blessing we've ever had. We have a great family, and you can attest to that. He's the one that tells others how good they are and everything, but I want to tell you we're happy and thankful for our family. And so we have tried to to serve in various ways in the church, and probably my work at the Advocate as an editor and a publisher has been more meaningful to us. There are, as I said, 17 publishers to the Gospel Advocate. I have known 7 of them personally, and Talbert Fanning, we'll go back there, he was my favorite of all because he would try to reach people with printed material that they could take with them. I still have tracts and copies of the Advocate that my mom and dad had when they died. A special issue of 100 years of the Advocate. This is 125 years. This is the Advocate after it was 50 years old. Here was a copy of the Gospel Advocate that I made off of the original. This is how it appeared in different formats and all. The whole thing was, how can you get people to study the Bible and share with others? And that's what made, to me, Fanning so important, was that he developed the system of printed sermons, really what they were, in the magazine, so that people could go on and study it at home and elsewhere. It's interesting that I find that I still get letters from people. In fact, a person from Oregon came to the Creefall Church where we worship about a year ago, and she said, "Aren't you Neil?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "My grandson and I have moved here because we couldn't get the truth taught to us in the area where we lived. And we read the Gospel Advocate and decided to move here and worship with churches like you have here. We had at Creefall. We're getting close. So one of the things that concerns me is that when we study the truth, and I like that thing that, where the scriptures speak, we speak, where the Bible speaks, where we speak. And as people in our area have been blessed with good teaching, the Willard Collins, so forth, on down to the local church, I'm disturbed again. We've let the church digress as it has through the years. The newspaper I read this last week about one of our local churches is going to consider putting in women as elders in the church here in Nashville. Shouldn't be. There are several churches of Christ that are using the instrument this morning in worship. Should not be. There are several things like this that should not be, because we have left studying the Bible and doing what we felt we wanted to do ourselves. And so going all the way back to having then editors or people who made the teaching so that people would get it from other sources. We need to look ourselves to see if our editors are helping us study the Word of God, and I think it's something that is timeless. And if we do, in fact, I spoke at Faulkner University a few years ago, and I researched it. Men like you and I who have graduated from college generally do not read more than one book in their lifetime after they graduated from school. So most of us have only read one book. I know you. He reads lots of books. And if you only read one book, what is it going to be? I pray that we'll read good books, and we will read and learn from those who have studied, such as as David Lipscomb, Talbert Fanning. Well, I was trying to think real quick, but the sign says that it's time to.
Yeah, the first bell's gone off. Before the second bell, talk for a minute about and even up until, when you were editor, how the different magazines would be in contention with each other, and there was a lot of bickering back and forth.
The one thing that really bothers me as I read about the history of the Advocate and other magazines, how the editors often, though, fought with each other. And so the Gospel Advocate has been in existence for 168 years. I had a lot of hair, but 168 years I've lost it. And so with that being the case, help me again. What was it?
Well, like your experiences even with other magazines sort of taking shots at.
Well, the Gospel Advocate was 168 years old. The Firm Foundation was started in Texas to combat the teachings of the Gospel Advocate. They didn't like each other, but it wasn't a gospel thing as much as it was a personality thing. There was a school in Terrell, Florida. Can't think of the school's name. It was Florida Christian College, and the president of that school and Willard Collins were roommates in college, and it was kind of a shame that they couldn't get along in that period of time. And the Firm Foundation had similar beliefs. Of all of these other people that I think of, and excuse me, I'm running short on oil up here. When I can't think of the name. Oh, Foy E. Wallace. Foy E. Wallace was one of the most learned editors, preachers that I have ever known, and I knew him personally. He was on both sides of the fence. When he taught at Florida Christian College, he did not believe in in any other things other than teaching the scriptures. Then, when he went to Fried Hardeman, he changed his mind, and so it's kind of a interesting philosophy that has been shown through the years. But the editors per se were generally well known as faithful in their studies and in their teachings, and have shared with others the way of the Lord. That's I think, I don't know where the bell went. Yeah, it did. But anyway, I'll pass along some other information. After last Monday or Tuesday, Nelson said, will you speak Sunday? So I got some things out so that I could be prepared for today. And it's been fun. It's been good for me. It's been 6 years since I retired from the Advocate. The Advocate is currently still in existence, but there were a lot of problems with COVID-19 and getting the papers to print, and just all kinds of things like that. The new owners are very, very biblical in their beliefs, but they've had major health issues. So we're kind of in limbo again, but we're going to keep trying to teach the Word of God in season and out of season. Be ye steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, for as much as your labor is not in vain in the Lord. My favorite verse: study the Bible, take what you read and teach it to others.
All right. We're dismissed. Thank you.
Appreciate it.